So this is Beijing. And you can see from this photo that the most dominant architectural component isn't Rum Koolhaas's CCTV building, but the dense, massive cloud of air pollution hanging over the city. And this is a condition that the citizens of Beijing live with every day. This condition actually determines cultural behavior. You might stay home from work one day because of it. You might choose a different street in the city to live on. You might actually choose your holiday destination based on air quality. So whole patterns of life depend on this condition. And yet the morphology of the city, the architecture itself, makes no reference to it. Air pollution is composed of two key ingredients. You have oxides of nitrogen, which are referred to as NOx, and volatile organic compounds, which are VOCs. There are others, but these are the two that are kind of the ones you hear the most about because they're the ones that lead to serious illness, premature death. And these are also two byproducts of combustion engines, so we're actually talking about an air pollution created by cars. So China has a problem, but Europe has a problem too. The EU has recently reported that nearly a third of European citizens are exposed to excessive levels of air pollution. And nearly half of EU member states haven't met the regulations assigned for NOx reduction by the EU. And these regulations are even less stringent than what the World Health Organization assigns for global air pollution. So there are a lot of technologies out there that help to fight pollution. This particular one is a photocatalytic titanium dioxide. And it basically uses ambient sunlight to reduce air pollution in cities. And it's a photocatalyst, and the way it works is that the titanium dioxide actually receives photons from solar energy. So we're talking about like an ambient gray day. And then noxious particles or other organic compounds would come into contact with the surface, and then they would get broken down by redox reactions. And this whole process yields calcium nitrate, which is actually a decent soil fertilizer. And this would be washed away by rain. And this technology we encountered in 2005 working as architects. And it came amongst a whole slew of smart materials that seemed to be entering the market. And these materials all had this great technology working on a microscopic level, yet were aimed at architectural applications. This particular one was embedded into a coating, and its point was to be something close to an architectural white paint. And its point was actually to slip onto buildings unnoticed and reduce air pollution. And it looked like this. It had no shape. And we thought, here's this great idea, and it has no form. In fact, we didn't see a lot of ornament happening around us anywhere, except for on high-profile, high-budget architecture projects. And so we started to make the connection between what was happening with this technology on a molecular level and sculptural shapes. And we asked ourselves, maybe ornament could enhance this technology. So we get asked a lot, why can't you just code a whole city in this? And the answer is, yes, you should. But you also just want sometimes more of it where it's needed, in places like pollution hotspots. And these are places in the city that are like intersections between levels of high pollution and high populations, or where you have like a high traffic condition and a pedestrian area. And some examples of this are entrances to traffic tunnels, or alongside parks or schools. So here we have this photocatalyst, and this is a light-triggered technology. It uses sunlight, which is this endlessly renewable resource. And we thought, we want to cluster this technology in the light. Why don't we make giant radiators with this technology, or giant meshes or sponges? Let's use surface enlargement and pack as much of the photocatalytic activity as we can onto a structure. And then let's put that structure, site it close to a pollution source so it can be more effective. So when you think about surface enlargement, you look at fractals. And these are really cool. And then we looked at Romanescos. These are these green cauliflowers. And then we looked at corals. And we found corals really interesting because they actually use surface enlargement for better reception of light. Because they're on the ocean floor, they need a better level of light to photosynthesize. And they're omnidirectional, so they can receive light from lots of directions. And they're visually complex. So what we set out to do was to create a substrate for this photocatalytic technology. And we wanted something to be ornamental enough so that it would elicit an emotional response. And then we wanted to use the scale of architecture to deploy it over large areas. But when you want to make something ornamental in architecture, you have a problem with buildability. As architects, previously, we were searching for a way to make visual complexity, but in a modular way. And we encountered these. This is a quasi-crystalline grid. And for us, it was a great escape from the standard orthogonal construction grids. And how it's great is because you have two module types that repeat over and over, but you don't have any repeating motifs in the pattern. It's essentially aperiodic. So we invented a three-dimensional architectural module that you could put on buildings or infrastructure, and it could reduce air pollution in cities. And we named it ProSolve 370E. And the naming is in kind of reference to the car industry's habit of naming their cars after engine volume, which is a kind of loose relationship to how much pollution the car actually produces. And we decided on 370E as a reference to how much surface enlargement we thought we could get in order to counter that volume of pollution. So we've had prototypes for about 5 years. And on one end of this photo, you can see where we started. And at the other end, where we are today, this is the architectural facade module. And it's a thermoformed plastic shell to keep it lightweight, and it's coated in photocatalytic titanium dioxide. So ProSolve does 3 things. First, it uses surface enlargement to increase the efficacy of the technology. And secondly, it creates turbulence. And this is in order to break wind speeds so that you can slow the pollution down and makes it easier to catch. And this is something that's kind of the opposite of what the car industry does in designing for aerodynamics. It's also designed, its shapes are designed to enable better reception of light. So with these shapes, we're getting second and third bounce of photons. And in 2012, we had the opportunity to put this on a building. So this is a depolluting facade in Mexico City. It's a 2,500 square meter screen at the Torre de Especialidades at the Hospital Manuel G. Gonzalez in Mexico City. It's possibly the world's largest urban air purifier. So the World Health Organization ranked Mexico City as 4th worst in the world for air pollution. And using the surface enlargement we have in ProSolve and the distancing from the building of the screen, we're actually getting about 5,000 square meters of photocatalytic activity here. And according to recent technology trials, we can estimate that this facade is reducing the air pollution of approximately 1,000 cars in Mexico City on the road per day. So after ProSolve, we got grouped in with the Sustainability Club. And our product got labeled with such terms as green architecture or econic. And we were constantly asked to justify the ecology of our product. And we found this a little frustrating because at the time, sustainability was coming to mean material minimalism or production leanness or thinness. Principles, you could say, were associated with late modernism. And the whole thing kind of provoked us to try to find out if there wasn't a material we could make that would be okay to overproduce, to be material maximized, be opulent with, and yet still do it guilt-free, so that it would still address our global problems. So we saw global warming as carbon flux. And by carbon flux, I mean the traveling of fossil carbon in the Earth to the atmosphere through combustion processes. Before industrialization, a lot of our carbon was actually in the Earth. And in order to make materials and energy, most of it has traveled to the atmosphere. So here's where we are now. Our skies are full of carbon in the form of CO2, and our Earth, our subterraneous carbon, is almost gone. And we wondered if there was a way that we could reverse this flux, because we immediately saw this carbon in the atmosphere as a resource. And we thought, can we just find a way to mine the skies, get our hands on this material, and make something with it? And then when we're done making something with it, we'll put it back in the ground. So one of the leading strategies to do this is called biochar. And essentially, it's a process by which you would burn biomass that's absorbed CO2 in its lifetime into a carbon-stable char. And then you would put the char in the earth, sequestered. And this is a great revolutionary idea. The problem with it at the moment is scale. It has this characteristic of being a great soil enhancer. And the agricultural industry uses it that way. But the problem is demand for soil enhancers isn't very high. And what our global problem probably requires is that we find a drastic increase for demand for biochar. So we looked immediately at consumer products. Because in consumer products, you can create a whole industry, sometimes only through design, that would create enough demand that would pull production forward of a material. And we thought if we could just get this biochar into a product, sequester it into a product that had real demand, that was just so cool that everyone wanted to have one, or we could replace something that was already in high demand, could we actually have any impact? So we're in the early stages of proposing a new material that would be carbon negative and made with biochar. And this would invert the current eco-perceptions about leanness and production. Here, production would be good, overproduction even better, and consumerism would be good for the environment. This is a sample of the kind of state that we're in. We're nearly completed with our material, and currently we're getting about 70% biochar. So again, recognizing that the activity in our atmosphere is constantly changing and constantly impacting how we live, and yet the morphology of our cities remains unchanged. We're proposing that our material have an architectural application. And this could be anything like a building block or a facade module, but something that has the luxury to be opulent, material maximized. Essentially, we're proposing an architecture synthesized from atmospheric carbon dioxide. So I see the city full of inactive surfaces, abundant with dormant facades. And I have to ask myself, if our immaterial realms are having this much impact, are starting to act architecturally, shouldn't our architectures be engaging in that level too? ProSolve sits in a whole family of active devices that have the potential to be coupled with inactive surfaces in the city that would help the city be tuned better to its microclimates. Essentially, what we're proposing is an architecture of building hacking, which would be interfering with existing structures and tuning them to better respond to our new and changing criteria. Thank you.